Welcome, everyone, to the Ghost Helpers podcast. I'm your host, Tina Erwin, and I'm here with my guest, Chloe Scolaro. The Ghost Helper podcast is where our paranormal is our normal. And each time we have a podcast, we discuss some new and interesting element of the paranormal and the spiritual world, which actually are one and the same. And you can pick this up on the Ghost Helpers podcast, Ghost Helpers on YouTube, and anywhere people like to listen to some of these interesting things, including Spotify and Apple Podcasts. So we're in a lot of different places. So again, welcome, Chloe, to the podcast today. Can you tell me a little bit about how we connected?
Sure. Well, first, thanks for having me on again. It was a blast last time. I myself have a touch of the psychic ability. So when I found your podcast on Apple Podcast, I listened to all your episodes. I read a lot of your books, and then I reached out to you for some guidance, and that's opened up a lot of really cool avenues and conversations. So happy to be here.
Oh, that's fantastic. You posed a very interesting question. So I'd like to ask you if you could please just share what your question was, and it forms the basis of our topic today.
Right. When I was reading your books, something that came up a lot, and especially the most recent one you put out, the Psychic Kids, Psychic People, was you talked about Christ consciousness, which is something that I'd never heard of before. And I think when you hear Christ or Jesus Christ, you think about religion, you think about Christianity. You know, some people, if they're versed in Judaism, thinks about Judaism, but, you know, most likely they're thinking about, you know, modern day Christianity or Catholicism. So it just is kind of interesting to me because when you say Christ consciousness, I guess the question is like, what really is that?
I thought it was a great question. And it's one of these things where you go along and you think, well, surely everyone will understand that. And maybe some people do, but I think it was a really astute question that deserves an in-depth answer, which is why I thought it would be fun to do a podcast about it. We know that when Christ walked the earth, or I like to think people know that when Christ walked the earth, his was a message of love. When Buddha walked the earth, his was a message of love and compassion. And these two great beings covered a large part of the then known world. I mean, Jesus wasn't everywhere. Buddha wasn't everywhere. And when you look at their coverage, spiritual coverage on the planet, which I don't mean to use modern day terms, but that's what it boils down to. Really, they're saying the same things: love one another, kindness, compassion, paying attention to the karmic path. The whole thing helps those populations that they did reach, and then the ancestry that continues to this day. Mm-hmm. When a lot of people talk about the Buddha nature, you know, bring forth the Buddha nature or Bodhisattva. So I feel when I wrote the books and I talk about Christ consciousness, most of my readership is more Western world than perhaps Eastern world. And I felt the use of Christ consciousness would be something perhaps people could relate to a little bit more. And these concepts transcend religion. This isn't about religion, or did you go to church this week, or, you know, is Jesus your best friend? I would hope that certainly he would be everyone's best friend. But the concept of Christ consciousness, in my interpretation, is the feeling that at any point in time, you are connecting to the essence of the consciousness of Christ. You don't have to sit in a room with uncomfortable seats with some person at the altar saying they're the intermediary. Mm-hmm. The concept of Christ consciousness is the concept of the priesthood of all believers, where anyone can connect to Christ at any moment, anytime, anywhere on the planet. And he said, you know, just think of me, I will be with you. That is bringing forth or bringing within yourself the light of Christ consciousness. And it's a really beautiful concept.
So in, I guess, spiritual law, because that's what we deal in, because it was Christ considered a person. In religion, Christ is considered somebody that was a perfect person, came down, and then was, returned home to the heaven world. But in spiritual law, I mean, I guess when I listened to your book today to kind of give a refresh, and one of the things that you had said that I want to touch on again later is you talked about holy water and how holy water isn't holy because it's tainted by the sins of the person who is anointing it or is blessing it or whatever else. And so I guess when we talk about Christ consciousness, are we talking about the frequency of Christ's teachings, of the idea of what Jesus Christ is, or are we referencing the physical person that at one time could have existed?
That's about 5 questions in one. So I'll try and
Sorry.
I'm going to kind of deconstruct that just a little bit. First of all, Christ was a person who came to his. Jesus Christ was a spiritual being who came to earth in human form.
Sorry.
When Christ came to earth, he came in a mortal body.
Mm-hmm.
And he came in a mortal body so that there were mortal people who could see him as the same as themselves. He wore the same clothing. He had the same hair, and he looked like these people. It's like Buddha looked like the people in Asia. So you're going to relate to a person who looks much more like you and your cultural area than someone who is completely foreign or, I hate to use the word alien, but, if, he came out of a spaceship, that would have been really tough. They would not necessarily have integrated him into society in the same way. And so when we talk about who Christ was as a being, he was part of a family. Mary was his mother, Joseph was his father. But Joseph died when he was 13. I don't think a lot of people know that. He was head of the household and he had I think 8 siblings. And we know this is true because they recently found a papyrus in Egypt that said they found the tomb of James, who was the brother of Jesus. And it says this on the papyrus, James, the brother of Jesus. So he had so many siblings. But his father died at the age of 13. He learned carpentry from his father. They had contracts with, of all people, Pontius Pilate. He refused to pay them. And this made Jesus got to feel what injustice feels like inside a mortal body. And there may be listeners who are saying, where is she getting this information?
I was going to ask that.
Well, it's not like I'm channeling some great and mighty thing. It comes from the Urantia book, Urantia. And in the Psychic Children, Psychic People book, there is a whole suggested reading list. And this is at the top of the list, or close to it. The Urantia book is 2,095 tissue paper pages. The last third of the book catalogs every moment of the life of Christ. It is an astounding study. It transcends anyone's Bible version. And there's so many versions of the Bible. What do you believe? The Urantia book is a book about how God organizes the universe. It's printed in every language on earth, and every bookstore, ironically, is required to carry 2 copies because my youngest son used to work at a bookstore, a chain bookstore. When you start reading the last third of this book, what you discover is the beauty of the words of Christ, how simple his message was. There's one whole section where he talks about the beauty of friendship and how even in the darkest days, the friendship of another person can lift you up. And you share these trials together. And he talked just one section was just about how important friendship is and the beauty of family when family members love one another and they help one another. He lived in a mortal body to know us, to relate to each of us on a far more sophisticated level. He came, think about the metaphor, down to earth. Christ was a down to earth being who had to deal with the death of his father, had to deal with his father's estate, manage the bills, can keep a business running, help with his siblings and various problems his siblings had. He had to help his mother, make sure she was taken care of. And he did all of this before he started preaching. So from the time he was 13 till the time he was 29, he really started putting his message out. He was doing a lot of learning and growing, and he did a lot of traveling. He was actually he was like a companion for this very wealthy young man. He traveled all over parts of Asia as well. There are some faiths that believe that he went to the Tao Cross Monastery in Tibet and consulted with the Tibetans as well. He was traveled, he was learned, he was compassionate, but he also was in a mortal body. And one of the challenges of a mortal body is having emotional responses to things. When someone cheats you, hurts you, betrays you, you have a physical reaction, an emotional reaction. When that happens, you now know how other people are feeling when it happens to them. So I would offer that one of the many myriad reasons he came to earth was to know us on a much more significant, intimate level, and to enjoy humanity, look at people in the face, see the suffering, feel the suffering they're going through, and then have all of the oral history, the oral tradition passed down as much as possible. You have to remember, no one wrote the first thing about Christ for until 200 years after his death. 200 years before anything was really written. A lot of it was second and third hand. That's why the Urantia book, which is basically comes, don't ask me how, it comes from the higher realms. Any person on earth has the opportunity to read it. Decide for yourself. Don't just believe me. Own this book. It will change you. I mean, it's about this thick. It's not for the faint-hearted, but it is a treasure trove of spiritual knowledge, understanding, and insight. Did that begin to address some of your questions?
It did. I think that, especially in today's society, everybody wants the source and is this true, and fact checking. And last time we spoke, we talked about AI, and there's all these kinds of AI generated, for lack of better words, BS. And so I guess, but you say it's written and it comes from the higher realms. Can you explain that a little bit? Because if it's been 200 years, how do we know? I guess we never know, but
that's because there's a very elegantly logical reason that we can know that this is true. A spiritual being of the caliber of Jesus Christ had many other spiritual beings with him. And everything that he did on this planet was in fact recorded by them. That's why that account is so intensely accurate. And when you listen, when you're reading it, it rings true. The beauty of some of the words are really quite astounding and meaningful. And there's what makes this, I keep saying the word astounding because it is. And when you're ready, someone introduces you to this book. And that's what happened to me. Someone said, I was told in a dream to tell you to go buy this book. It's like, what? But those things happen. So I contacted my youngest son, and he said, oh yeah, this bookstore carries it. We're required to carry 2 copies. So I bought one, and he brought it home.
Why are they required to carry 2 copies?
We did not know. No one knew. It was just something weird, but they were required to carry 2 copies. So then I opened it up, and the pages are tissue paper thin. When you have a book that's over 2,000 pages, that's amazing. But when you look at the contents, all the different categories and all the different authors, there are an amazing array of spiritual beings that wrote this book. I can't even begin to describe all the, all the special beings who helped, who did this, who did that. And, Bright and Evening Star and a Morning Star. And, Michael, Archangel Michael wrote this. And one of the Melchizedeks wrote that. And the Lenonadeks wrote this. And all of a sudden, your mind is massively expanded to the power and the dimension of God, not just Christ, but God. Because this book is, again, not for the faint-hearted. And the book is Urantia, Urantia, and that's the name that off-worlders call this planet. And it's a great schoolhouse planet. And all of them, write about what was happening in various points in time. Some of them write about the universe. How does God organize the universe? There's an entire massive section just on the story of Adam and Eve, who they were. They were not naked and afraid in a garden eating, forbidden fruit. They were spiritual beings who came down to set up the planet on a sociological level, following spiritual and civil law. That's what they were here for. But a lot of very primitive people can't understand the concept that the higher realms send physical people in physical bodies to present a message. And when you look at it from that point of view, my gosh, it certainly makes sense. There have been people throughout time who look at Lao Tzu. He was an amazing individual. You look at some people who really want to get the message of peace and love and harmony, but that's a really hard thing to do. What the Urantia book talks about is, how does God organize the universe? How many universes are there? How are the universes organized? Who runs the universe? How does that work? And when you begin to look at this frame of reference, it changes everything. And this planet was honored, blessed, rewarded by the opportunity to have a being such as Christ come to earth and walk among mortal people, know us on an amazing level, love us, love our faults, love even the pain they caused him, because it opened his heart of compassion, and learn about the various foibles on a very, very intimate level. There's a massive section on how he picked his apostles and who they were, what they did for a living, and they did not sacrifice. Before they went with Christ, they went during seasons where the crops were in. Their families, these men were all married. They were not celibate. They were married. They had children before they walked the earth with Christ for those few years. The crops were in. Their families were financially taken care of. So again, this was good financial management. No one thinks about who were the apostles. Were they human? Were they saints? Oh my gosh, no. They were ordinary men who had a little bit greater extraordinary level of understanding. Many of them were Essenes. The Essenes were the people who came here before us and knew that Christ was coming. His coming was predicted. Oh, the Christ is coming, but they knew that. And so there's a lot of conversation, and what happens is we have Christmas and we have Easter. Christ was born in a manger and he died on a cross. Nobody discusses the years in between. And those are absolutely valuable to understand. So when I talk about Christ consciousness, that consciousness lives within me because I have a deep and abiding gratitude and respect for this great being who walked this earth and who was a son of God, who is a son of God, and bestowed upon us his presence, his teaching, and his love. So again, I did a long dissertation, sorry.
So, has this happened since Jesus Christ? Have we gotten another person of his caliber and of, you were talking about how we're blessed to have had this universe was blessed to have had him come down. Has there been anybody else that we know of?
I'm kind of be careful here.
We love asking the hard questions.
And I appreciate that. I would say there have been several. But I'm not qualified to describe their caliber. Were they equal to Christ? I'm not remotely qualified to answer that question. So it's a way above my pay grade. What I can say is I know for a fact that there was a master in Greece, Scolaro was his name. There's a master who was born in England and was here in the United States, Dr. George King of the Aetherius Society. And so we are aware, I am personally aware of two. And the teachings of both of them mirror the love and the teaching and the practicality of the teachings of Christ. Christ was very practical. Common sense, ordinariness of what it takes to go through a normal day, be a parent, be a father, be a mother, be a child, live through all of the roles a mortal person plays. We're not one-dimensional. We're so many differently described as a person. So yes, there have been others. I'm sure there's more than that. And I'm not necessarily fully knowledgeable enough to answer that question.
So we as people, we are all spiritual people having human experience. We reincarnate, we come back, we forget about our past lives. Did that apply to Jesus as well? Or was he, it's kind of silly to say, was he aware? Because he was a baby, obviously. But was his message known to him? He came with a purpose, or did he reincarnate just like the rest of us and figure it out along the way?
No, it is my understanding he is not part of the reincarnation cycle because he is not a mortal person as you would think of it. He had the capacity to take on a mortal body, but he was not here in what is known as full aspect. And that is a very important spiritual term. If Jesus Christ had walked the earth in full aspect, his frequency would have been so high, and he would almost not have been able to look at him, this powerful, intense, glowing feeling. So his aspect was tempered. His frequency was still high. He's a dynamic. I don't even have vocabulary to describe the capacity that Christ had to manage his own frequency so that he could be at a level where people could begin to relate to him. And that was the point of his being here. He was completely relatable. You could relate to him. You could touch his hand. People would they knew from his presence as he walked along the street, there was something amazing about him. And I got to see a glimpse of this when my husband and I lived in Italy for 3 years. When we did that, we went to all these different places, but one of the places we went was to a town called Potenza, which is in the middle of Italy, in the middle of kind of nowhere. And it has a mini Grand Canyon. Well, in those Grand Canyon are caves where the Christians hid from the Romans right after the times of Christ. And they have these fabulous paintings on the wall of pictures of Christ, and they have him glowing. They show his cloaks, his robes. They show them looking at him. And every single drawing, his hands are reaching out. Christ didn't do this. This was the Catholic Church holding in the energy. But opening up your hands for the chakras so that this energy can go out. If you're sending prayers, send prayers with open arms. When Christ sent love and blessing, he didn't do this. He sent the blessing out with open arms. This, look at the encompassing of how your body language functions and focuses. He tempered his aspect so that mortal man could begin to see him as themselves, that they could rise to the occasion, that they could have the hope. Look, you can do this too. It was such a simple, beautiful message, so often lost in the busyness of daily life. Did that answer your question? Did I get that fully?
You did. You did. It's something I wanted to touch on because obviously karma comes into everything. So I want to talk about karma. But did Christ know the way that he was going to leave this earth beforehand?
Yes. Oh, absolutely.
Okay. So that was
not unknown. Yes. Okay. Karmically, I don't want to presume to know all the karma of the method of Christ's death. That would be arrogant and egotistical. So I'm going to be very careful about this. It is my understanding he understood, he knew the method of death. It doesn't mean that it was easy for him. It was not. Do we think a being of this caliber could have stopped it if he had wanted to? Yes, he could have.
So I guess obviously our world and our universe incurred karma with him being here, right? That in itself probably brought on a good amount of positive karma. What did the way that the human beings at that time chose to essentially execute him, because that's what happened, what karma do you think that brought on to humankind at that time or to this world?
I think that Christ's method of death was a karmic opportunity for all the people present. Everyone present had a karmic opportunity in how they reacted. Look at the men who carried the cross for him. Think about the karma of carrying the cross for Christ. Think about the karma of the people who wiped his wounds, who had to stand there and watch a beloved master tortured in such a way. And even as he was tortured, this was a huge karmic lesson and opportunity. He is still forgiving those who did this. Forgive them, Father, for they, the guards, know not what they, meaning the dark world, the dark forces, do. Forgive them, Father, for they, the mortals, know not what they, the unseen, are doing. He gave healing to the child of the soldier who harmed him. He showed an elevated level of compassion because through suffering is enormous learning. All those who continue to follow him and love him and learn from him stood as enormous examples for others. It's very challenging to speak of Christ and pretend to be this knowledgeable person. I am a student of the life of Christ. Based on many years and years of reading about this remarkable, incredible being, the love people found within themselves, and those who were with him at that time and have since reincarnated almost have a really hard time talking about it because it's still emotional even after 2,000 some years. To have been in the presence of such a great one would have been life-changing and karma-changing, creating within those souls, those privileged souls, to have been there at the time he was alive, an opportunity for eternity to spread the word of hope and compassion and the love of God. God did not abandon Jesus. God gave everyone opportunities. How each person exercised and used those opportunities would determine their future for lifetimes to come.
That was a lot.
That's a lot to unpack. That is a lot.
It's
and
good.
you think about women. It was the women who took the shroud. I've been in the presence of the Shroud of Turin. You will never be the same when you see it. You see his image was reverse magnetically embedded into the cloth, and they have never been able to debunk it. It really is the Shroud of Christ. It was so powerful. It's not like any other person who's ever walked this earth. And so that experience was just massive. And the women helped to wrap him, and they're pouring their love into him. Think about the women who got to do that. And it was the women who recognized that Christ had risen. And they spread that word because they were keeping the vigil for him. And his message when he rose from the dead is that there is no death. We will continue to rise. We will continue to live and to love. Again, enormous message of hope.
So this was a lot of awesome background and talking about Christ consciousness. Man, I can't speak. And what it is. I know you and I have talked offline a couple times about organized religion, and I have a interesting relationship with organized religion. But before we get into that, when you talked about Christ rising, what do you think about the second coming of Christ rhetoric that is there in the world?
I think there is a longing. If I were to be poignantly honest, there is a longing for someone to come and help us overcome the darknesses many of us see around us. There's still suffering. There is a great deal of wealth all over the world now, but yet you turn around and there's still suffering. We're looking for someone to come and save us. That's why some of the religions talk about, are you saved? Are you saved? I without getting into that, will Christ come again? Possibly. I don't tell futures, as many people have heard me say many times. If Christ comes again, I hope that it will be a way that we will recognize without a doubt that, this great being from Venus, which is why they always talk about the morning star, this great being has graced us with his presence again. Will Jesus come again? I do not know. I simply do not know. If he does, anyone who is here at the time and can feel it to the depth of their soul and their being would be wise to take advantage of that current opportunity. There are many people today who were with Christ during his brief lifetime on earth. Maybe that's all the karma earth had with those 29 years. He did a lot in 29 years. And for that, maybe we can say we are eternally grateful.
Right. So something you talked about in your book a lot was you have a lot of examples of people who have psychic abilities but are too scared of talking to their church leaders, or who have talked to their church leaders and they're saying that that's the devil's work, or that that's not, the way of God or whatever else. What is your, I guess you said your opinion on it a lot, but I guess what do you think about just the way that with your vast background of knowing about that time period and knowing about Christ and what all that means, how do you feel about the tone that organized religion has in today's world?
I would offer that some organized religions have Christ on that cross. I'm going to start with that. It is the largest symbol of black magic you can imagine. If you truly love Jesus, that cross perpetuates the torture of a master. And it is considered, on some levels I can't necessarily go into, intensely black magic. If you have photographs of Christ, I actually have a very large photograph of the Shroud of Turin that is actually facing me as I'm doing this podcast, just so I can do whatever I can possibly do to be in resonance with a great being in the most humble way possible. And as I'm doing that, when it comes to organized religion, this belief that Christ died on the cross for sins that had not been committed yet is one of the greatest perpetrations of black magic I can possibly convey, because it creates a perpetual guilt among large populations of people. 30 million people believe that Christ died on the cross for sins they hadn't even committed yet and might not ever commit. Christ didn't die on the cross for people's sins. He died on the cross from what I am told, to manipulate karma for something that was going to happen and now did not happen. He was a master of understanding karma, because you can't be that being and not understand karma on massive levels.
Pause really quick. That's something I've never heard before. Do we know what was supposed to happen?
I do not know exactly. I only know that it was not to die on the cross for your sins. It's like, where did that come from? This was a great being who knew how to manipulate karma. So he took on karma so that something else wouldn't happen. And when that took place, then it freed the way for mortal people to live their lives, to make their mistakes, to come back again, to try again, to do better, to love more, to forgive, to show compassion. Earth is a mortal schoolhouse on every conceivable level.
I just had such an
way.
Interesting thought as you were talking. Do you think that it's possible that this earthly schoolhouse has a timeline attached to it? And maybe Jesus incurring the karma was to pave the way for us to have the death and rebirth cycle, but maybe there's not an expiration date on it, but maybe that's where the second coming of Christ comes in, where we're going to reach a cap on how many times we can do this and how long the earth is going, and, all these things. I mean, people talk about climate change and Mother Earth is upset, and which is all true. But do you think it's possible that we have a timeline that we don't know about?
Let me offer a slightly different view. What if it isn't us that has the timeline, but the earth itself has a timeline? The earth, let's back up and look at a little bit of solar system history. It is not widely known that there was a planet called Maldek. That planet was blown up by scientists who were playing with things they should never have been playing with, because of the ego that they had. How do we know this is true? Wink, wink, the asteroid belt. That was Maldek. When Maldek blew up, all of the souls on that planet had to go somewhere else to work through the karma. And Earth was asked to take on these souls. Every planet is also a spiritual being. That's why Native Americans are so reverential toward the earth. A lot of Native people who understood the energies of the earth, the energies of nature, the energies of the Devic kingdom, honored the earth. And the earth has a timeline. The earth is evolving as a spiritual being. Her evolution cannot be held up by, and this is spiritual law, her evolution must continue. And we're on board. And the more we honor the earth in all of her facets, in all of her dimensions, the earth seems like it's just one dimensional. You know, we have things and, you know, my endless rocks. But earth has multiple dimensions. And all the things we do, especially nuclear power, has a tendency to create shock waves through the dimensions that define this divine being that is the earth. And so it's possible that one of the things that Christ did, I'm not saying that I know this for sure, I'm suggesting that perhaps it was to offer us longer, but to also help the planet itself, especially after the horrors of Maldek, playing with, all the things we're playing with now, DNA, a lot of things that shouldn't necessarily be tampered with in an irresponsible way.
Do you feel like climate change is a direct response to those things? In my personal opinion, there are some things you just can't deny. And when the world is screaming, essentially, or you know, I feel like there's been a trend in the environment over the past couple of years, and I'm not somebody that's super versed in all those things. However, you know, when there are plagues that have been frozen for however many millenniums that are all of a sudden coming up again, you know, like some things you really can't kind of ignore. So, and rising sea levels and all that kind of stuff. Do you think that's a response to the things that are happening in our world today?
Well, let's just back up just a little bit. You know, Plymouth Rock was there in 1620, and Plymouth Rock is not covered yet. So if the rising sea level issue were in fact true, Plymouth Rock would be underwater right now, and it is not.
Right. I don't know. I'm not super. I just know that there's a lot of stuff going on, and do you think that is a direct?
Yes, but looking at the issues, there are islands in the Pacific that have been going up and down for a long time because the earth physically moves. The continental plates shift. So we know those things happen. The ice caps are now having more ice than they have had in 30 years. So it's not warming, it's cooling. And a lot of things are done to make people afraid. We don't need to be afraid. All we need to do is take the best care of the earth everywhere we physically are. I mean, I've been fighting to save an aquifer here in Washington State for 3 years, trying to get agencies to do their job. And so I'm working with a wonderful group of people to protect the aquifer for other human beings up here, for the salmon streams, for the orcas, the apex predators, looking at everything being connected. The earth has gone through warming and cooling cycles for millennia. That is a normal part of Earth's cycle. And nothing any human being is going to do is going to affect that, whether you block out the sun or you cut emissions. I mean, one volcanic eruption does more emissions than I think some countries do in 10 years. So, I mean, we need to get off that soapbox and focus on save your trees, save your aquifers, be responsible in how we're doing things. Pay attention to your local environment. What can you do? How can developers work with environmentalists to have responsible development? That is a much more measured, balanced way to approach all of this. And so the more people honor the earth in every way, the more the earth stays in balance. The Hopi, and I think the Navajo have a word for it. It's called Koreaniskatsi. We are now in a place of Koreaniskatsi, which is world out of balance. I talk about this in the Psychic Children, Psychic People book. The book is got a lot more dimensions than just the title. The title was a tough one. So the more we care for the earth, the more we are responsible with each other, the more in balance we will be, and so will the planet. We cannot operate one without the other. When you pollute the skies, you pollute yourself. So you hurt the earth, you hurt yourself. You honor the earth, you honor yourself. And that level of balance is achievable by each and every one of us, wherever it is that we are. This whole recycling thing, that's great. But we will soon do what Singapore does. Singapore collects all the garbage that we all have. They burn it every night as fuel, and they have no landfills. Singapore is an island. There's no space for that. So they have no landfills. Why are we doing this? We can do what they do, because anything that is carbon based, which is what oil and gas and coal are, it's all carbon based, can be used as fuel. And in the 90s, a guy had invented a process to do just that. So we have the technology, we're just not yet using it. So whatever people are doing to help recycle, to reuse, is a very good thing. Maybe that's the only thing a person can do. Keep doing what you can do. Do the best you can. We're a little bit off the Christ consciousness.
That's okay.
But it does go back to the whole concept. If you say, you're saying prayers and you ask that the light of Christ consciousness fill the earth. Imagine a 2-line prayer. Heavenly Father, I pray that the light of Christ consciousness fill every square inch of the earth. You have given something beautiful and blessed to the earth. Light and love and healing. Right. So, okay, go ahead. Next question.
I can bring it back to the Christ consciousness for you. We can get off of the earth train. One of the questions that I had was, you just said it right there in your prayer book and whatever else, it's Heavenly Father. What advice do you have for people? Sorry, my dog is trying to eat a cat tree. What advice do you have for people who have a hard time separating God and religion?
I have received criticism because of my prayer said Heavenly Father. And if your father abused you, that's going to be hard for you. You can swap out Heavenly Father for Dear God. Because human beings were put here. God created man in his own image. God the Father, the Creator. We create our children.
Question really quick. I'm sorry. Who created religion? Because if God is God and there is no God was Christian, God was this, where did religion and all these different branches come from if God is just being, essentially? I think that's what is hard for people to separate between, like, they hear God, but because of the way that we're all, I mean, I don't think there's anybody on this earth that is older than 115 or whatever. All they've known their whole life is the association between religion and God.
And that's really what this podcast is actually doing, is inviting people to lift themselves. I had the same conversation at lunch, identical. Someone who was in her early 20s just asked me the same identical question. So this tells me this is in the mind belt. What I'm suggesting very humbly is lift yourself out of religion and create a personal, private relationship with God or with Christ or with Buddha, whoever, which, or with your archangel, with Archangel Michael, with a spiritual being, with a super high frequency. And this goes back to the concept of Martin Luther, the priesthood of all believers. Think about that word, the priesthood of all believers. When I was a little girl in the Catholic Church, and my family left the church when I was 9, I was horrified looking at Christ on the cross. It made me want to vomit every time I saw it. I didn't understand why, if we loved Jesus, why would we do that to him? And then when you had to have Holy Communion, you're eating the body and blood of Christ. I wanted to vomit with that too, because it felt cannibalistic to me. And I know people talk about the Last Supper, but Jesus spoke in a lot of metaphors because the education level at the time he walked the earth was not high. So metaphors worked really well. So the body and the blood, the lifeblood of Christ, were the waters of the earth, was the plants and the animals, and all of this is the lifeblood. It's hard for me to conceive that he'd want everybody to run around pretending they're eating and drinking his blood. I mean, my God, this is so hard for me. How did religion get started? My theory is it started with tribalism. And then when you have Christianity started, because remember, Judaism had already started. The Essenes had already started. The Essenes were told by the higher realms that Christ was coming. And so they were very quietly preparing, and people who understood that direct connection to the divine, which is what the Essenes had, they were very quiet about it. And they were primarily, I hate to say it, the Lebanese people. That was the basis of the Essene population, which was very close to Jerusalem, and what the boundary lines were a little bit beyond me. But as time went on, Christianity became all about power. Who had power, who didn't. And once you realized that you had a powerful symbol, Christ died on the cross for your sins. Jesus didn't say that. He didn't say, I came to die on that cross for your sins, because you haven't been born yet, but by God, you're going to sin, and, I'm going to suffer for it. I just never believed that. And if a person gets rid of the guilt, you'd have a lot fewer health problems, because guilt will seek punishment, do a lot of health problems.
Right. And if people release guilt, they'll have a lot less control.
If you're not guilty because you don't go to church 6 times a week and twice on Sunday, you lose all that control. I need to be very careful here, because a lot of churches have done a lot of good things for people. They've been there in emergencies. They've been there with deaths. They have helped out. I mean, I don't want to throw all religion out. It's not my point. I would like to suggest to people in organized religion, get rid of the guilt. Start to talk about how good people are. If your focus is not guilt, and your focus is the goodness of humanity, you change a mindset. You start changing the cellular structure in the listeners in front of you. If I send my love out to every listener and believe that everyone who happens upon this podcast is a person who is seeking to find their personal truth, and perhaps something we've said today has stirred something within them, I would like to suggest a personal, private relationship with God. If you don't want to call him Father, don't call him Father. If that's uncomfortable for you, nobody's going to take your name. Do what's the most comfortable. But I would counsel, don't use the word spirit. Spirit can be a ghost, a black magician, a lower realm intelligence, an angel. I don't know what it is. Be specific. Talk to God. Remember when Neil Donald Walsh did conversations with God, he didn't say conversations with spirit. He was extremely specific. Book is a bestseller. I could not be happier for this man. He's done a lot of really good things. He's awakened so many people. So there are a lot of messengers out there on some amazing levels.
You know, it's funny you say that. Obviously, having psychic ability isn't the most palatable for everybody. It's palatable for us because it happens to us. But when you talk to regular people that aren't there yet, they kind of sometimes look at you like you have two heads. So I'll make the joke and say the wind is talking to me today. That seems to be a friendly, palatable way for people to go, okay, you know.
So I hear I know Native Americans who can hear what's on the wind. They can talk to the spider crossing their path. They can listen to the crow. They can look at the symbols of what crosses their path. And when you start studying how Native Americans did things, how they listened to the wind, they could tell what was coming with the weather. If they listened and they looked through the forest, they could see the path of the deer. If they looked at the trees, they could see what was a dangerous place to put an encampment because they could hear the higher realms through nature. But when the white man came, he didn't listen to the native people. He didn't understand how to talk to them. I guess that's why Kevin Costner's film Dances with Wolves was such an interesting film, because he took the leap of faith to understand the Native Americans, and they welcomed him. They welcomed someone who wanted to understand their ways, which are in fact quite sophisticated in understanding the ways of nature. When you look at nature and you understand those ways, you learn how to be in harmony with nature. So getting back to organized religion, people did it because it was camaraderie. It created a sense of community. They created community centers. Let's all get together to worship God. And then human beings have this habit. They want to set up rules. Well, these are the rules. Well, this is what we believe. Well, this is what I think I heard.
Right.
That's how it happens. I don't believe it started maliciously, but somehow, I mean, it's like Philip II of Spain wanted to take over England because he was given this divine covenant to kill all these people. Mm-hmm. Or the Native Americans in the Americas, you know, when the Spanish explorers came and they massacred all these people, all these native tribes for the gold in the name of religion. It's just greed. Maybe there will come a time when we will separate the greed and the control from what is truly spiritual and loving, which is the nature of Christ consciousness, coming back to the beginning, right. which is why we're here at this moment.
So to kind of wrap this up, what do you have to tell people maybe that haven't read your book yet or haven't gotten there to put themselves in resonance with Christ consciousness and in the frequency of Christ consciousness? In your book, you talk about putting angels, imagery around you. I know we've talked about prayer. What are other ways, if people are struggling right now with kind of establishing that personal relationship with God, what can they do to put themselves in the frequency of Christ consciousness?
Ask God to help you directly. You don't have to sit in a building of wood and stone. You can be in bed at night and say, "Dear Lord, would you please help me with," fill in the blank. It's achingly simple. God isn't complicated. When you are suffering, when you are grieving, when your child is sick, when your husband committed suicide and you feel so alone, you are not ever alone. Just ask God to help you and to give you the strength and courage to go on another day. That's why I wrote the Crossing Over Prayer book. It's 88 prayers that connect you directly with God. But you don't need my prayer book or anybody's prayer book. You can do it yourself. Christ wrote the Lord's Prayer. His siblings asked him for a prayer, and Christ said, the greatest prayer is the one you create in your heart. And being siblings, they said, yeah, but it's going to sound so much better when you do it. That's actually a quote from the Urantia book. And when he did that, he created this prayer, which has lasted over 2,000 years, which tells you how powerful the Lord's Prayer is. It's wonderful. You can create that prayer. I mean, basically, Christ gave everybody permission. Just talk to God directly. So many messengers have said the same thing. Ask God to help you with, or ask God how you can be helpful to another person if you don't know what to do. And don't expect an email the next day. Listening to God opens up those parts of your brain, your third eye, that enables you to connect to God. That's a really powerful thing. When you connect to Christ consciousness, you don't have to be a psychic. You just have to be sincere and fill your heart with love, which actually helps your heart muscle do a better job in your body. Every time you fill your heart muscle with love, your brain, all the organs of your body with love, and you send this out, you're changing the frequency of your own body, and you're putting it in resonance with love, which is the super high frequency. And that's good for you and everyone who's receiving your blessing or your help. That's how you can connect. It's just achingly simple.
Well, I think that was wonderful.
Well, I think we've covered a lot of ground today.
Sure have.
Yeah, I think we're probably blown a lot of minds. So, well, hopefully we don't have too much of a mess to clean. Oh, well.
We'll cover it on the next one.
Well, I want to thank you for asking such important questions.
Thank you for letting me ask those questions.
I think that we're a good team. We're going to have to do this again.
I agree. I'll come up with more. Don't worry. I'm always thinking.
It's so awesome. All right, everyone. Thank you for joining us today on our Ghost Helpers podcast, all about Christ consciousness. If you want to hear more, we're on Ghost Helpers on YouTube. That's a channel. The Ghost Helpers app is available free on Amazon. And this will be uploaded to Spotify and iHeartRadio and Apple Podcasts as well. So I look forward to having everyone listen. And if you have comments, contact@ghosthelpers.com reaches me. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you again, Chloe.